And let's wrap up this, the 10th chapter of The Embroidered Sunset by Joan Aiken. Lucy drove back to Appleby in a black rage, going much faster, overtaking more recklessly than was her normal habit. Just outside Appleby, however, she was obliged to slow to a crawl, for the traveling hedger was negotiating a particularly narrow stretch of lane at its maximum 15 miles per hour, and the driver could not or did not choose to let her by. Very likely he could not hear her, for the tractor and the electric shears together made a formidable stuttering roar. At last he pulled in and halted at the foot of the track leading up to High Beck. Lucy angrily shot past and did not remember until she was halfway to Wildfell Hall that she had promised to go and look for a black A mark on the stray tabby that roamed the glen. Oh, hell, she thought. I'll do it tomorrow. Aunt Fennel will just have to wait another day. After all, the cat seems perfectly fit and well. Probably has a high old diet of rabbit. Or maybe Colonel Linton feeds it. The rage against Uncle Willoughby had exhausted her. She felt heavy and aching with it, hardly able to face the prospect of giving the old people their supper and shepherding them to bed. Mrs. Marsham met her in the hall. "Oh, Miss Culpepper, thank goodness you're back." Lucy's heart sank. "Is anything wrong?" she asked, observing Mrs. Marsham's pallor and distraught appearance. "Not Aunt Fennel. No, it's Harold, my son. He's been in an accident in York. He's in the infirmary there. They just phoned me. I'd like to go at once. Can you see to things here? Adnon's coming either tonight or tomorrow. Old Miss Copple's got a bit of a temperature." "I'm so sorry. That's awful for you. Yes, I'll keep an eye on things. Hope you get better news by the time you get there. Nothing special that needs doing?" "No, just the usual routine. Oh, I seem to have lost one of my contact lenses. They're insured, as they're so tiny that once you drop them, they're almost impossible to find. But if you should come across it, could you put it in the box on my desk?" "Sure." Mrs. Marsham hurried out through the kitchen. Lucy followed and found Fiona stirring a massive cauldron of baked beans. Meals, I've got to say. Meals, I must say. Looking after just one great aunt would be a nice change. Did you hear about Miss Marsham's son? Poor wretched, 16 tons of newsprint fell on him. It took them an hour to fish him out. He isn't expected to live. Poor woman, how terrible for her. During the evening, Uncle Willoughby telephoned Lucy. "Hi, Princess," he sounded perfectly cordial. They might have parted that afternoon on the most dulcet terms. "Just ringing to tell you that Russ and I are shifting camp, going on to Kirby, to the Promenade Hotel there, if you should want to get hold of me." "Oh, really?" said Lucy coldly. "Tomorrow?" "No, tonight. We finished our meetings in York, and I got a sudden yen to sniff the ocean. Found the Promenade had a couple of rooms, so we're just about to flit. Might look in on you tomorrow, now we're so much nearer." "Tomorrow's not very convenient for a visit," Lucy said dryly. "The woman who runs the house has had to rush off as her son's been involved in an accident, and we're very short-staffed." "I heard about the accident. It was on the local radio. Happened just outside this hotel, poor thing," Uncle Willoughby said cheerfully. "Oh, well, if you don't want us tomorrow, we might go up and take a look at High Beck Cottage for old time's sake. I thought you couldn't remember if you had even been there. Now you must excuse me. I've a lot to do." Lucy locked the front and back doors, checked that the convalescents were sleeping peacefully, and that Miss Copple was no worse, and then dozed on a camp bed she had made up for herself on the landing, since Mrs. Marsham, distracted by worry, no doubt, had locked the door leading up to her own quarters on the 3rd floor. The night passed without event. Fiona had been obliged to return home to see to her baby, but promised to be back by 10 in the morning, and Mrs. Thwaites Anne had been persuaded to arrive at 7 with the milk. Eunice, the sulky girl from Kirby, had turned up so routinely. Also turned up, so routine went on more or less as usual. "Did you go and have a look at the tabby puss?" Aunt Fennel asked hopefully when Lucy took up her porridge. "Aunt Fennel, I'm terribly sorry. I was late getting back and I didn't." "Could you today, dearie, do you think? It is so much on my mind. Aunt Fen, love, I don't know if I shall be able to today. We are pretty hard-pressed, you know, with poor Mrs. Marsham away. She rang half an hour ago to say her son is still in a critical state and she can't leave him. Aunt Fennel treated this news with inattention frequently accorded by elderly persons to details about individuals with whom they are not personally acquainted. She said pertinaciously, I worry so when I think of that poor puss with no one to feed it. Try and go, dearie. I can't till the doctor's been anyway. The old lady was sitting in a bedside chair, eating breakfast while Lucy straightened her covers. After a pause, she said plaintively, My right knee's rather stiff today, dearie. Do you suppose you'd have time to put on a hot compress? Really, they are like children, Lucy thought, sighing. If they can't get attention one way, they'll try something else. But this seemed a request that could not be reasonably ignored, so she said, I'll do it at once before Adnan comes, and hurried off to get hot water, lint, and radiant salts. Uncle Willoughby wanted to come here today, but I told him it wouldn't be convenient, she said, rubbing the knee vigorously. Oh, well, that's a good thing, then, Aunt Fennel said, in something more nearly approaching her normal manner. She added thoughtfully, I never did like either of those boys, but Willoughby was by far the worst. Lucy's hands checked a moment in their rubbing. She was on the point of speaking, but did not. Both bone selfish, both dishonest, both lazy, Aunt Fennel went on. How James could have had such a pair of sons. Nothing would stop them when it was a case of getting something they wanted. Willoughby was stronger than Paul, of course. My father wasn't dishonest, burst out Lucy. Oh, but he was, dearie. Aunt Fennel gave her a brief, vague glance, as if she had almost forgotten Lucy's presence. Yes, just as bad as Willoughby, only not so clever with it. Well, I remember when he stole Willoughby's new camera, and Willoughby found out, my goodness, then there was trouble. It always upset Willoughby terribly when someone else tried to cheat him, because he was such a sly one himself. I don't believe you. Lucy's hands were trembling. She poured more hot water into the basin and picked up another piece of lint. Anyway, they were probably only children then. How old were they? Then later on it was money, and to make matters worse, they were both after the same girl, only Paul got her. Aunt Fennel went on dreamily. Paul had the charm girls, never liked Willoughby. Lucy heard the echo of Willoughby's voice. With all his faults, Paul was a dear, lovable fellow. At least the girls loved him. It's not true, she thought. Aunt Fennel's just teasing me, because I wouldn't go and look for a cat. It's probably the thought of Willoughby in the neighbourhood that's put her in this funny mood. Paul was musical, too, and Willoughby was jealous of that, because he hadn't got a scrap of the artist in him. But Willoughby was the stronger. Oh, yes, Paul couldn't bear responsibility. He abandoned his wife and child, went to Canada and died, whereas Willoughby's done well, I believe. Angrily, heedlessly, Lucy dipped the lint in the bowl, gave it a soft squeeze, and dropped it on Aunt Fennel's knee. The old lady flinched. Oh, dearie, that's hot. It's far too hot. Take it off, quick. With a pang of remorse, Lucy snatched it off and saw the red square that had begun to rise at once on the thin old leg. I'm sorry, Aunt Fennel. I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't thinking. I don't believe it's going to be bad, though. Here, quick, I'll put a bit of salve on it, she added contritely, but Aunt Fennel shrank away from her hand. Never mind, she quavered. I'll see to it myself. I'd sooner, thank you. Take away the basin. You take away the basin. She ignored Lucy's outstretched hand with the salve and tottered with shaky dignity back to her bed. I'll have a little rest. That was rather a shock. When Lucy followed to turn back the covers, Aunt Fennel, as if expecting another act of violence, retreated to her dressing table, where she started rummaging in a drawer full of tubes and little boxes, casting one of her old distrustful glances at Lucy. Oh, my goodness, does she think that Willoughby put me up to this? Please let me make it better, Aunt Fennel. Don't bother, thank you, the old lady said. A bell rang. Won't that be the doctor? Hadn't you better go if Mrs. Marsham's away? Angry and unhappy, Lucy went toward the bedroom door. I'll come back and see how you are, she said. Don't bother, thank you, Aunt Fennel repeated. She added, if it should be Willoughby, say I don't want to see it. Say that I don't want to see him, and shut the door gently but firmly behind Lucy's back. And that's the end of chapter 10.